My husband promised to stay with me forever. So when he thought he could have a secret affair, I decided to help him keep that promise. Literally. His little secret didn't end with heartbreak. It ended with a paramedic calling me from a cheap hotel room, asking what to do with a man who was now permanently glued to his mistress. This isn't a love story. It's a story about consequences. My mother, Christina, always told me a very simple thing. She'd say, "Honey, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen." It was her way of saying that life has consequences, that our choices, big or small, will always lead us somewhere. I just never imagined my own story would end with a tube of industrial glue and a phone call from a paramedic. A call that would set me free, but also break my heart in a way I never thought was possible. This story isn't about the glue, not really. It's about how we got there. It's about a love that was supposed to last forever, a family I thought was unbreakable, and a man I knew better than anyone in the world. Or so I believed. I promise, you don't want to skip this emotional story, packed with heartwarming lessons about love, sacrifice, and the surprising ways a broken heart can heal. So get comfortable as we dive into this unforgettable story. And if you are new to our channel, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell, and give this story a like if it touches your heart. Before the silence, before the secrets, before another woman's name became a whisper in our home, there was just us. Me and my husband, Charles. For 4 years, our life was the kind of life you see in commercials. We were the happy couple. We had a beautiful baby boy, Scott, who was the center of our entire universe. Charles wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend. He was the person I'd call from a hotel room in another country, just to hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I remember the day we brought Scott home from the hospital. Charles was so scared to hold him. He was this big, strong man, but he looked at our tiny son like he was made of glass. He held out his hands, and I placed Scott in his arms. And in that moment, I saw a look on Charles's face I will never forget. It was pure love. It was the look of a man who had just been given the entire world. He promised me that day, he whispered it while looking at Scott, that he would protect us, that he would always be our rock. I believed him. I believed him with every single piece of my heart. Our little family had its own rhythm. We had movie nights on Fridays, with popcorn that was always a little too burnt. We had pancake mornings on Sundays, where Scott would get more syrup on his face than in his mouth. Charles would laugh, a big booming laugh that would fill the whole house. He would lift Scott up, swing him around, and our son's giggles were the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The bond between me and my son. It was something else entirely. Scott was my shadow. He was a piece of my soul living outside of my body. When I would come home from a long trip, he would be waiting at the door. His little face would light up, and he'd run into my arms so hard he'd almost knock me over. He would bury his face in my neck and just hold on, as if he was making sure I was real. I lived for those moments. They were the fuel that kept me going. I would hold his little hand, and I would think to myself, this is it. This is everything. As long as I have him, everything will be okay. But things weren't entirely okay. There was a small crack forming in the foundation of our perfect life. And the cause was my job. I'm an air hostess. I travel the world, I see amazing places, and the job pays very well. It's the same job I had when Charles met me. It's the same job I had when he told me he loved my independence, my ambition. He said he fell in love with the woman who had stories from Paris and Tokyo. But after we got married, and especially after Scott was born, something changed in him. My travel bag sitting by the door started to look like a threat to him. My uniform hanging in the closet seemed to make him angry. He never said it directly. That was Charles's biggest problem. He didn't know how to talk to me. If I did something to offend him, if he was feeling lonely or upset, he wouldn't sit me down. He wouldn't look me in the eye and say, "Honey, I'm struggling. I miss you when you're gone." Instead, he would build a wall of silence. He would give me one-word answers. He would stare at the TV, completely ignoring me. The warmth in the house would disappear. It was like living with a ghost. And then he would look for someone else to talk to. He would call his mom. Suddenly, my mother-in-law would be calling me, telling me that I needed to be a better wife, that Charles was feeling neglected. He would complain to his friends, and I'd hear whispers at parties. It was humiliating. I felt like our private life was a show for everyone else to watch and comment on. I told him so many times, "Charles, please. Talk to me. Not to them. I'm your wife. We're a team." He would just nod, say okay, and then do the exact same thing a week later. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was wrong. The worst one, the one that would eventually lead to the glue and the paramedics, was his colleague at the office. Her name was Anita. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He mentioned her casually. "Anita from marketing helped me with a report today." She was just a name. A pretty lady, he said, who mostly kept to herself. But then he started pouring his heart out to her. He took all the frustration, all the loneliness, all the things he refused to tell me, and he handed them to her like a gift. He told her we were having problems. He told her he didn't know what was happening with our marriage. And she, of course, pretended to care. She listened. She gave him advice. She became his shoulder to cry on. And slowly, carefully, she started luring him in. She was the one who understood him. She was the one who was always there. I was just the wife who was never home. Things got colder between us. The silence grew longer. The space between us in bed felt like a canyon. One evening, we had another argument. It wasn't a big fight. There was no yelling. It was worse. It was just empty. He accused me of caring more about my job than my family. I told him he was being unfair, that he was pushing me away by refusing to talk. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was suffocating me. I stood up and said, "I'm going to my mom's place. I need some space." I went to our bedroom and started packing a small bag for me and Scott. A part of me, a desperate, hopeful part, was waiting to hear his footsteps. I was praying he would come into the room, wrap his arms around me and say, "Don't go. Let's fix this." He never came. I packed our bags, I picked up our sleeping son from his crib, and I walked into the living room. Charles was sitting on the sofa, staring at the blank television screen. He saw me standing there, with my coat on and our son in my arms. He watched me walk to the front door. He watched my hand go to the doorknob. He didn't say a word. He didn't move a muscle. He just sat there and watched me leave. As the door clicked shut behind me, the cold night air hit my face. But it was nothing compared to the coldness I felt in my heart. Because in that moment I knew. It wasn't just that he was angry. It was worse. He didn't care. My presence, my absence, it made no difference to him at all. And that was the moment I realized my husband was already gone. I just hadn't left the house yet. The car ride to my mom's house was the longest journey of my life. Every single street light we passed seemed to flicker, like a fading memory of the bright life I thought I had. I drove with one hand on the wheel, and the other resting on Scott's chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. He was so peaceful, so unaware that our entire world had just tilted on its axis. I cried the whole way. Silent tears streamed down my cheeks, not for the argument, but for the silence that followed. It was the silence that was screaming at me, telling me everything I didn't want to hear. A small, stupid part of me was still waiting for the phone to ring. I kept glancing at the screen, hoping to see Charles's name flash across it. I imagined him panicking, realizing his mistake, calling to beg me to come back. But my phone remained dark. It was as empty as the passenger seat next to me. When I pulled into my mother Christina's driveway, it was almost midnight. The porch light was on, as if she was expecting me. She opened the door before I even had a chance to knock. She didn't look surprised, just sad. She didn't ask a million questions. She just opened her arms and hugged me, a long, warm hug that felt like coming home. She took Scott from my arms, who was still sound asleep, and carried him inside to the spare room. She made me a cup of tea, and we sat at the same kitchen table where I did my homework as a little girl. She looked at me and said, "Ruth, what happened?" I told her everything. The coldness, the silence, the way he just watched me walk out the door without a word. She listened patiently, nodding her head. When I was done, she took my hand. "You remember what I always told you about the kitchen," she said softly. I nodded, wiping a tear from my eye. "Well," she continued, Sometimes you have to be the one to turn the heat off, even if it means the food gets cold. I stayed at my mom's house, living in a strange kind of limbo. For the first few days, I told myself he was just being stubborn. I told myself he was waiting for me to call first, to apologize for leaving. But my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, didn't call me. He didn't text. He didn't ask about his son. Instead, he did the one thing that proved our marriage was truly over. He called Anita. He went to her, the woman who was a stranger to our family, and he reported me. He told her I had left. He told her I had taken Scott. He played the victim, the poor abandoned husband, and she played the role of the sympathetic friend. She listened to him, she comforted him, and then she invited him over to her place. He went. He drove to her apartment while his own son was sleeping in a strange bed across town. He sat on her sofa, in her home, and he continued to complain about me, his wife. And as the night went on, she offered him more than just a shoulder to cry on. She spent the night with him. And just like that, a line was crossed that could never be uncrossed. They had sex. They started an affair. It was a complete and total betrayal of every promise we had ever made to each other. It didn't take long for me to hear about it. Our town wasn't that big. A friend of a friend saw his car parked outside her apartment building all night. The news traveled through whispers, and eventually it got back to me. My friends were furious. They were ready for a fight. They came over to my mom's house with fire in their eyes, telling me what I had to do. "You have to fight for your husband, Ruth," one of them said. "You can't let that husband snatcher win." I appreciated their loyalty, but they didn't understand. I looked at them, and a strange sense of calm washed over me. I said something that I didn't even know I believed until the words came out of my mouth. I told them, no. A decent and faithful man cannot be snatched. It was a moment of pure clarity. Anita wasn't the problem. She was a symptom of the problem. The problem was my husband. His lack of character, his irresponsibility, his inability to face his own life. That's what exposed him. He walked into that situation all on his own. She didn't snatch him, he gave himself away. In that moment, I decided I was done. I was not going to let a man, not even the man I once loved with all my heart, reduce me to a shadow of myself. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to build. Thank God for my job. The very thing Charles had come to hate was the thing that gave me my freedom. I had my own money. I had my own strength. I didn't need him to survive. So, I started looking for a new place. I found a lovely little apartment, bright and sunny, with a small balcony perfect for growing flowers. It was just for me and Scott. A place where there would be no silence, no tension, no ghosts of a broken marriage. Moving out of my mom's house was a big step. It felt real. I bought new furniture. I painted Scott's new room a cheerful shade of blue. I enrolled him in a new school closer to our apartment. I was building a new life for us, piece by piece, from the ashes of my old one. It was hard, and some nights, after Scott was asleep, I would sit in the quiet living room and cry for the family I had lost. But every morning, when my son's smiling face woke me up, I knew I had made the right choice. I was facing my life squarely. I focused on my son, on my job, on creating a home filled with peace and laughter. I had no idea what Charles was doing, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I thought that was the end of that chapter. I had walked out of the kitchen, and I had built my own house. A safe house. But I was about to learn that some fires don't just burn out. They smolder, waiting for the wind to change, waiting for the chance to rage back to life. And a storm was coming. For 6 months, life was quiet. It was a good kind of quiet, not the heavy, suffocating silence that had filled my old house, but a peaceful, gentle quiet. Our new apartment became our sanctuary. I filled it with plants and photos of Scott. His crayon drawings were taped proudly to the refrigerator. We created our own little world, a world where the only rhythm was our own. We had dance parties in the living room to silly songs, and we built magnificent forts out of pillows and blankets. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I was just Ruth, a mother building a life for her son. I was no longer a wife waiting for a storm. But storms don't ask for permission. They just arrive. It started with a phone call. It was a Tuesday evening. I was giving Scott his bath, and my phone, which was on the counter, buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. And again. After the fourth call, a voicemail notification popped up. I dried my hands, a strange feeling of dread creeping into my chest. I listened to the message. It was him. It was Charles. His voice was a ghost from another life. It sounded strained, desperate. Ruth, it's me. Please, can you just call me back? I need to talk to you. It's important. That was it. I deleted the message and blocked the number. I thought that would be the end of it. But I had underestimated his audacity. The next day, he called from a different number. Then another. He started leaving longer voicemails, his voice cracking with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. He talked about Scott. He said he missed him, that he was sorry. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I ignored them all. I was a fortress, and I would not let him breach my walls. But he was persistent. He started sending texts. Long, rambling paragraphs typed out at 2 a.m. He told me what had happened with Anita. He wrote that after I left, their little affair wasn't the perfect fantasy he had imagined. He discovered she wasn't just seeing him. He wasn't special. He was just one of many. He said she had a whole roster of men she was playing games with. When he confronted her, she laughed in his face and told him to leave. She used him to break my family, and once the job was done, she tossed him aside like garbage. He painted himself as the victim, a man who had been used and manipulated. As I read those texts, I felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. He wasn't the victim. He was a volunteer. He had willingly walked into her web. It's amazing how some people can cause so much pain, and then act like they're the one who got hurt. They cheat, they lie, and they manipulate, and then they want pity when it all blows up in their face. If you can't stand people who refuse to take responsibility for their own actions, and you believe that trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild, then prove you're not on their side. Drop a comment below with accountability matters. Let's see how many of us believe in that. When the texts and calls didn't work, he escalated. He involved our parents. My mother-in-law started calling me, crying, telling me her son was a broken man, and that I needed to find it in my heart to forgive him. Then he went to my own mother. He showed up at her doorstep, looking thin and tired, and he begged her to talk to me. My mother, Christina, called me that evening. She didn't tell me what to do. She simply said, "Ruth, he looks like a man who has lost everything. I'm not saying you should forgive him, but I think you should hear him out, if only for your own peace of mind. Then you can close this door forever, knowing you listened." Her words stayed with me. For several more weeks, I held my ground. But the constant barrage was wearing me down. And deep down, a small part of me, the part that remembered the man who was terrified to hold his own son, was curious. I needed to see him, to look him in the eye and hear it from his mouth. I needed closure. So, after several months of him begging, I finally agreed to give him an audience. I picked the place, a small busy coffee shop downtown. A neutral territory. I told him he had 30 minutes. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing outside, nervously checking his watch. He looked different. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, sadder. When he walked in and our eyes met, his face was a mixture of relief and terror. He sat down and for a full minute he just stared at me. "Thank you for coming, Ruth," he whispered. He told me everything, repeating the story he had sent in his texts, but this time, he looked me in the eye. He told me how empty his life had become. He said the silence in our old house was 1,000 times worse than the silence he had created between us. He admitted he was a coward. He admitted he was a fool. He said, "I destroyed our family for a woman who didn't care if I was alive or dead. And I lost the only person who ever truly loved me." Tears were streaming down his face. He wasn't making excuses anymore. He was just broken. He didn't ask me to take him back. He just asked for a chance. A chance to be a father to Scott again. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to start earning back a tiny piece of my trust. I didn't know what to do. My head was screaming at me to run, to protect the peaceful life I had built. But my heart felt a tiny flicker of something I thought was long dead. I looked at this broken man, and I remembered the good times, the laughter, the love that had been so real. I told him I would think about it. And for the next week I did. I thought about Scott, who deserved to have a father in his life. I thought about myself, and whether I was strong enough to let this man back in, even a little bit. Finally, I called him. I told him I would agree, but on my terms. I laid out the conditions. He was not to come to my apartment unless invited. He could see Scott on weekends, but I would be there. There would be no talk of us getting back together. And there would be absolutely no physical intimacy. This was not a reconciliation. It was a probation. He agreed to everything without hesitation. And so he began. He started showing up, not as a husband, but as a handyman, a friend, a father. He fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen. He assembled a new bookshelf for Scott's room. He would bring groceries without being asked. He never overstayed his welcome. He would spend a few hours with Scott, playing with him, reading him stories, and then he would leave. He never once pushed my boundaries. One afternoon, he was playing with Scott on the floor, and Scott's favorite toy truck broke. The wheel came off. Scott's face crumpled, and he was about to burst into tears. Charles picked it up. "Don't worry, buddy," he said gently. "Daddy can fix it." He spent the next hour at the kitchen table with a tiny screwdriver and some glue, patiently putting the wheel back on. When he was done, he rolled it over to Scott, and our son's face lit up with pure joy. As I watched them, a strange feeling washed over me. Charles was sober. He was present. He was trying so hard. He was showing me with his actions what his words couldn't. He was showing me he was a changed man. And honestly, it was moving. I saw glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The kind, gentle man who was a wonderful father. One evening, after Scott was asleep, Charles was about to leave. He paused at the door. "Ruth," he said, his voice quiet. "I know I have no right to ask this. But I'm still in love with you." I never stopped. He didn't wait for a response. He just gave me a sad little smile and left. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny it anymore. Against all my better judgment, against every wall I had built around my heart, I was starting to fall in love with my husband again. The ice that had frozen around my soul was beginning to thaw, and I was terrified, because I knew deep down that a thawed heart could be broken all over again. The decision to let Charles back into my life, even just a little, was like learning to walk again after a terrible fall. Every step was shaky, uncertain. I was constantly waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. But Charles was patient. He understood my fear, my hesitation. He never pushed. He just kept showing up, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with quiet, consistent effort. He was rebuilding the trust between us brick by brick, one small, dependable action at a time. He started cooking for us a few nights a week. He remembered my favorite meal, lemon herb chicken with roasted potatoes, and made it perfectly. He'd sit on the floor for hours, helping Scott build elaborate cities out of colorful blocks, his full attention focused on our son. He started talking to me again, not about our problems but about little things. About a funny thing that happened at work, or a song he heard on the radio that reminded him of our first date. The heavy silence that had once defined our relationship was slowly being replaced by a comfortable, easy conversation. It felt like coming home. He kept his promise about respecting my boundaries. But as the weeks turned into a month, and then two, the emotional walls I had built so high began to crumble. One evening, after a particularly happy day spent at the park as a family, he was getting ready to leave. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, deep longing. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want him to go. The thought of him walking out that door and leaving me and Scott alone in the apartment suddenly felt unbearable. But I was still scared. My body remembered the betrayal even if my heart was trying to forget. I was honest with him. I told him I wasn't ready for that final step. I told him that before I could ever be with him in that way again, I needed to know for certain that there were no lingering consequences from his time with Anita. I needed him to get a full series of health tests. It was a cold, clinical demand, but it was the only way I could protect myself, both physically and emotionally. He didn't even flinch. He just nodded and said, "Of course, Ruth. Whatever you need. I'll make an appointment tomorrow." He did. And a week later he came to me with the papers, a clean bill of health. He handed them to me, not as proof, but as a sign of respect for my feelings. Seeing that paperwork, seeing how willingly he did what I asked, was the final key that unlocked my heart. He had proven he was willing to do the hard work. He had proven he was determined to be a better man. That night, after Scott was sound asleep, I let him stay. I had been dying to make love with my husband. I had missed his touch, the feeling of his arms around me, the safety and intimacy that I had once taken for granted. It was hesitant at first, and then it was a flood of every emotion we had been holding back for almost a year. It was forgiveness. It was a new beginning. It was a promise that we were finally, truly going to be a family again. Things were adjusting back to a beautiful new normal. We felt like a team again, stronger than before because we had survived the storm. We were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. We started talking about the future, about maybe even selling our old house and finding a new place together, a place with no bad memories. We were waking up in the morning, tangled up in each other, with Scott sometimes crawling into bed between us. It felt perfect. It felt like we had made it. And that's when she came back. It was a Saturday morning. The sun was streaming through the windows. Charles was making his famous pancakes, and Scott was laughing as he tried to flip one in the air. I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, just watching them, feeling a wave of pure, uncomplicated joy. Our little sanctuary was finally complete. Then the doorbell rang. Charles looked at me confused. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. I shook my head. He wiped his hands on a towel and went to the door. I heard the lock click and the door swing open. And then there was silence. A different kind of silence. A cold, familiar silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stood up and walked toward the hallway. And there, standing in our doorway, was Anita. She looked different. Her hair was messy, and her eyes, which had once looked at Charles with fake sympathy, now held a hard, bitter glint. And in her arms, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, she was holding a baby. My heart stopped. The coffee cup in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The entire world seemed to shrink down to that one image. The woman who tried to destroy my family, standing on my doorstep, holding a child. Charles was frozen, his face pale as a ghost. He finally found his voice, a choked whisper. "Anita? What are you doing here? Who is that?" Anita looked past Charles, her eyes locking directly onto mine. A cruel, triumphant little smile played on her lips. "Isn't it obvious?" she said, her voice dripping with poison. "I'm here to introduce you to your daughter." The world tilted. I had to grab the wall to keep from falling. Charles finally snapped out of his shock. A deep, guttural sound of pure rage came from his chest. "No," he growled. "No. That is not possible. You're lying. Get away from my family. Get away from my door." He tried to close the door on her, but she was too quick. She stuck her foot in the way, blocking it. "Oh, I'm not lying, Charles," she said, her voice calm and cold. "We can do a DNA test if you want. But you and I both know when she was conceived. She's yours. And you're not going to abandon her." We were back to square one. But this time it was worse. Before, it was a battle for a marriage. Now it was a war, and she had just brought a new, innocent soldier onto the battlefield. Charles absolutely hated her. I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't the weak, cowardly man who had complained to her about his wife. This was a protective father and husband, and he looked at her like she was a monster. He saw her for what she truly was, a woman determined to ruin what we had, to make us miserable for the rest of our lives. That morning was the beginning of a new nightmare. The DNA battle started, a slow, agonizing process full of lawyers and paperwork. But Anita didn't wait for the results. She began a campaign of terror. She started stalking me on social media, creating fake accounts to watch my every move. One day, a message popped up from an anonymous profile. It was a picture of me and Scott at the park from the day before, with the caption, "You look so happy. It won't last." She would show up at my apartment unannounced, buzzing the intercom over and over again, until I had to disconnect it. She would call Charles at all hours of the night, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming. But the worst was the anonymous text messages she started sending to my phone. They were screenshots of her old conversations with Charles, the ones from when he was first confiding in her. Then came the pictures. The nudes they had sent each other. She was throwing their affair in my face, a constant, brutal reminder of his betrayal, trying to poison the new trust we had so carefully built. Our sanctuary had become a fishbowl, and she was tapping on the glass, day and night, refusing to let us live in peace. We did everything we could to get away from her, but she was trailing us like a shadow. This went on for a month. A month of no sleep, of constantly looking over my shoulder, of my home feeling like a prison. I was getting tired. The hope and happiness we had found were being choked to death by this woman's obsession. Charles saw it. He saw the light in my eyes dimming again. He saw me retreating back into myself, the old walls slowly rising back up. One Sunday morning, he woke up before me. I opened my eyes to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, his jaw clenched. He looked like a soldier preparing for battle. He turned to me, and his eyes were dark with a terrifying resolve. "I can't do this anymore, Ruth," he said, his voice low and steady. "I can't watch what she's doing to you, to us. Enough is enough." He stood up and started getting dressed. "What are you going to do?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. He looked at me, and his face was grim. "I'm going to end this," he said. "I'm going to her place. I'm going to confront her. I'm going to make her understand that she needs to leave us alone forever. I'm going to threaten her if I have to. I don't care anymore. She will never bother us again after today." And with that, he walked out of the bedroom, leaving me alone with his chilling promise hanging in the air. The front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I stood frozen in the hallway, his final words hanging in the air, cold and heavy. She will never bother us again after today. I wanted to feel relieved. I wanted to believe that this was my husband, my Charles, finally being the protector he had promised to be. I wanted to see him as a lion defending his family. But I couldn't shake the image of the other Charles. The weak man. The man who crumbled under pressure and ran to another woman for comfort. The line between righteous anger and reckless stupidity felt terrifyingly thin. And I had no idea which side of it he was on. I waited. The whole day became a waiting game. Every minute that ticked by on the clock felt like an hour. I tried to play with Scott, to build his block towers and read his favorite storybooks, but my mind was somewhere else. It was in a dark apartment across town. I pictured 100 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. I saw him screaming at her. I saw her screaming back. I saw things getting broken. I saw someone getting hurt. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Was this my fault? Had I pushed him to this by showing him how much her torment was affecting me? The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the beautiful colors brought me no comfort. They only signaled the end of the day, a day that had passed with no word from him. Scott was getting tired and fussy. I went through the motions of his bedtime routine, the warm bath, the pajamas, the glass of milk. I tucked him into his bed and kissed his forehead, his peaceful, sleeping face a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside me. "I love you, my sweet boy," I whispered. "Everything is going to be okay." It was a lie, and the words felt like ash in my mouth. As darkness completely enveloped the city, my anxiety turned into a raw, gnawing panic. It was 9 o'clock, then 10, then 11. I started calling his phone. The first time, it rang and rang until it went to voicemail. "Charles, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please just call me. Let me know you're okay. I'm starting to get really worried." I waited 10 minutes. Nothing. I called again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. His phone was off or the battery was dead. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Had she called the police on him? Was he in a jail cell? Did he actually harm her? Did he do something that he could never take back? The man who had spent months patiently rebuilding my trust. Was he now sitting in an interrogation room, having thrown it all away in a single moment of anger? I couldn't handle the not knowing. I was pacing my living room like a caged animal. I had to do something. I had to talk to someone. My fingers trembling, I called the only person I could. My mom. Christina. I sobbed the second she picked up the phone. It's Charles. I don't know where he is. I explained what had happened, how he had left that morning to confront Anita, how I hadn't heard from him since, how his phone was now off. My mother listened calmly, her steady presence a small anchor in my storm of fear. Okay, Ruth, just breathe, she said, her voice a soothing balm. Panicking is not going to help. You don't know that anything bad has happened. He's a grown man. Maybe his phone died and he's just driving around, cooling off. Getting into a shouting match with that woman is not grounds for an arrest. But what if it was more than that, Mom? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What if he really threatened her? What if he put his hands on her? Then he will have to face the consequences of his actions, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. But you cannot invent a tragedy that might not exist. Here's what you're going to do. You are not going to do anything else tonight. You're not going to call the hospitals or the police stations. You're going to wait. If you still haven't seen or heard from him by the morning, then we can decide what to do next. But for tonight, you just have to wait. I knew she was right. It was sensible advice. But my heart didn't care about being sensible. My gut was screaming that something was terribly wrong. I agreed to do what she said, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I spent the rest of the night on the sofa, staring at the front door, my ears straining for the sound of his key in the lock. So many dark and negative thoughts went through my mind. I saw my life, our new life, shattering into a million pieces. I saw myself having to explain to Scott why his daddy was gone again. This time for good. The four walls of my safe apartment started to feel like a prison cell. It was just before 4 a.m. when I finally heard it. The faint sound of a car door closing outside, followed by the jingle of keys. A moment later, the lock on the front door turned. Charles stepped inside, looking exhausted and disheveled. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. He was okay. He was here. I rushed over to him. Charles. My God, where have you been? I've been out of my mind with worry. He ran a hand through his messy hair and wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Ruth. It was a mess. She called some of her guy friends on me. They cornered me, took my phone, and basically locked me in a room for hours. They were threatening me. I just got away. I looked at him, really looked at him. His story was dramatic, but something felt wrong. His clothes were wrinkled, but not torn. He didn't have a single scratch or bruise on him. For a man who was supposedly held captive by a group of angry men, he looked remarkably unharmed. The story coming out of his mouth just wasn't adding up. The details were vague. What men? What room? How did he just get away? My fear for his safety was rapidly being replaced by a cold, sickening suspicion. I'm just going to go freshen up, he said, avoiding my gaze and heading straight for the bathroom. The second I heard the click of the bathroom door, and the sound of the shower starting, a powerful, undeniable instinct took over me. I had to know. I had to be sure. My worst fear, a fear I hadn't even dared to name, was clawing its way up my throat. I grabbed his car keys from the little bowl by the door where he'd dropped them. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely fit the key in the lock of the apartment door. I slipped out, ran down the stairs to the parking garage, my heart pounding in my ears. I needed to see if I could confirm any of my fears. Was there a weapon in the car? Was there any sign of a struggle? I unlocked his car and opened the driver's side door. The interior was dark and quiet. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. I scanned the seats, the floor, the glove compartment. Nothing. Nothing seemed out of place. A tiny part of me started to feel relief. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid after everything we'd been through. And then I saw it. My flashlight beam landed on the driver's side door pocket. Tucked inside, next to a crumpled gas station receipt, was not a weapon. It wasn't a sign of a fight. It was something so much worse, so much more intimate, so much more devastating. It was a small, half-empty bottle of sex oil lubricant. And right next to it, a single, foil-wrapped condom. In that instant, the world stopped. The air left my lungs. The entire narrative he had just fed me, the story of threats and being locked in a room, it all dissolved into a pathetic, transparent lie. He hadn't been fighting for his family. He hadn't been confronting a monster. He had been with her. He had crawled right back into the snake pit. The man who had spent months earning back my trust had just burned it all to the ground in a single night. My worst fear wasn't that he was hurt, or in jail. My worst fear was that he had never changed at all. And in the cold, dark silence of that garage, holding the proof in my trembling hand, I knew my worst fear had just come true. I stumbled back from the car, the bottle of lubricant feeling like a hot coal in my hand. My legs were shaking. My vision was blurry. The concrete floor of the garage seemed to tilt and sway beneath me. It wasn't just the betrayal that hit me. It was the stupidity of it all. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of him. To lie to my face, to concoct a story about being held captive, and then to come home with the evidence of his affair sitting right there in his car door. He didn't just think I was forgiving. He thought I was a fool. I made my way back up to the apartment like a sleepwalker. I let myself in, closing the door silently behind me. The sound of the shower was still running. He was in there, washing her off of him, preparing to crawl into our bed and lie next to me. The thought sent a wave of nausea through me so powerful I had to clutch the wall for support. I stood there in the quiet hallway, holding that little bottle. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, cold, and final one. The part of me that had cried for him, that had hoped for him, that had so foolishly started to love him again, it just died. It turned to ice. And in its place, a different feeling began to grow. A calm, calculated, and icy rage. My mother's words echoed in my head. If you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. Charles had not only re-entered the kitchen, he had set the whole house on fire. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this time, he was going to get burned. I didn't confront him when he came out of the bathroom. I didn't scream or cry or throw the bottle at his head. I did something much worse. I said nothing. I pretended to believe him. I put on the performance of a lifetime, playing the role of the worried, relieved wife. I made him a cup of coffee. I listened as he added more fake details to his story, how scared he was, how he only thought of me and Scott. I nodded and looked concerned, and all the while, a plan was forming in my mind. A dark, terrible, and beautifully simple plan. The next few days were a blur of fake normalcy. I was an actress in my own home. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I kissed him goodnight. And all the while I was waiting. I knew she would be back. People like Anita never just go away. They thrive on chaos. Sure enough, a few days later, she showed up at our apartment building again, buzzing the intercom, demanding to speak to Charles. This time, when the fight started, I didn't feel anxiety. I felt opportunity. Charles, full of his fake self-righteous anger, told me he was going to handle it. "I'm just going to drive her home, Ruth," he said, grabbing his keys. "I'll make her understand this has to stop. I'll be right back, I promise." As he was about to walk out the door, I stopped him. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Wait, Charles," I said calmly. "I think I left my favorite lip balm in the car yesterday. It's in the driver's side door pocket. Can I grab the keys for just a second before you go?" He looked at me, a little annoyed at the delay, but he handed them over without a second thought. "Sure, honey. Just be quick." I took the keys and walked out to the garage, my steps even and measured. I opened his car door. The little bottle of lubricant and the condom were still there, waiting. I reached in and took the bottle. Then, from my own pocket, I pulled out its replacement, a small, unassuming tube of industrial-strength super glue, the kind used for construction, for bonding metal to metal. I squeezed the contents of the lubricant bottle out onto a rag I had brought with me, and I carefully refilled it with the clear, thick glue. I screwed the cap back on and placed it right back where I found it, nestled next to the condom. I returned to the apartment and handed him the keys, giving him a bright smile. "Got it. Thanks. Be safe." He nodded, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, a kiss that made my skin crawl, and left. I watched from the window as he got into the car with her. I watched as they drove away. And then I waited. I didn't know what would happen. I only wished for nothing to happen, but I was ready for whatever came. I was just waiting for my worst fear not to be true. The fear that he would, once again, choose her over us. The fear that he was, at that very moment, driving to a cheap hotel room. I gave it 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in my silent living room. The quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. It was the longest 2 hours of my life. And then my phone rang. It wasn't Charles. It was an unknown number. I answered, my hand steady. Hello. Hello, am I speaking to Mrs. Ruth? A calm, professional voice asked. Yes, this is she, I replied. Ma'am, my name is Dylan. I'm a paramedic. We've had an incident involving your husband, Charles. He's conscious and he asked us to call you. I closed my eyes, a wave of dark, triumphant sadness washing over me. Is he okay? What happened? I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of a worried wife. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The paramedic cleared his throat, sounding deeply uncomfortable. Ma'am, your husband. He appears to be, well, he's glued to a woman. They were in a hotel room. It seems they were having intercourse and, well, ma'am, they're stuck together. We're transporting them to the hospital now. I was happy and sad to hear that. A single tear rolled down my cheek. It was a tear of grief for the marriage I had lost, for the man I once loved, and for the family we would never be. But it was also a tear of relief. The final undeniable proof. The end of all the lies. He had made his choice, and now he was permanently attached to the consequences. Thank you for letting me know, I said, my voice clear and even. Will you be coming to the hospital, ma'am? The paramedic asked. I took a deep breath. No, I said. I don't think I will. I hung up the phone. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't check to see how he was doing. I didn't want to know the messy, painful details of how they were surgically separated. His circus, his monkeys. My only job now was to protect my son. I walked into my bedroom and pulled out a suitcase from the back of the closet. I started to pack my things, my movements methodical and calm. Then I went into Scott's room and started packing his. There were no more tears. There was no more anger. There was just finality. The heat in the kitchen had become an inferno, and I was finally walking out for the last time. And this time, I wasn't just closing the door. I was locking it, throwing away the key and never, ever looking back. As I folded my son's tiny t-shirts and placed them in the suitcase, a strange and profound peace settled over me. There was no more chaos, no more fear, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe hadn't just dropped, it had shattered us into a million pieces. The silence in the apartment was no longer heavy with unspoken words or thick with tension. It was just empty. And in that emptiness, there was freedom. I wasn't running away from a monster anymore. I was simply walking toward my own future. And that was how we separated for good. I didn't see him. I didn't speak to him. Our communication was reduced to the cold, formal emails of lawyers. I packed our things, moved us out, and filed for divorce. There was nothing left to discuss, nothing left to fight for. He had made his final choice in that cheap hotel room. And my choice was to honor it by removing myself and our son from the equation entirely. This whole tragedy, this entire storm of pain and betrayal, could have been so easily avoided. It all came down to a few simple, broken promises. He lost his family, the family he once swore to protect, because of his selfishness and his childish refusal to communicate. He couldn't handle the pressures of his own life, so he blamed my job, he blamed me, he blamed everyone but himself. He lost a woman who genuinely loved him, a woman who had weathered his silence, forgiven his first betrayal, and was willing to rebuild a life with him. He lost all of that because he couldn't resist temptation when it came knocking. He chose a fleeting moment of pathetic pleasure over a lifetime of genuine love and partnership. And most painfully of all, he lost his precious son. He lost the right to wake up to Scott's giggles, to tuck him in at night, to watch him grow up. Scott still asks about him sometimes, his innocent little face full of confusion. He'll ask, "When is Daddy coming to fix my toys again?" And every time he asks, a piece of my heart breaks. Charles lost all of that because he couldn't keep his manhood inside his trousers. Some people might hear my story and judge me. They might say what I did with the glue was cruel, that it was a step too far, an act of pure revenge. And maybe it was. I won't deny the cold satisfaction I felt when I got that paramedics call. But before you pass judgment, I need you to ask yourself a truly honest question. When someone you love repeatedly sets your world on fire, and then cries to you about the heat, at what point do you stop handing them a bucket of water? At what point do you instead hand them a mirror, so they can finally watch themselves burn? Many men underestimate the power of communication in a marriage. They think love is enough. They think passion is enough. But the truth is, communication is the foundation. It's the key that solves problems before they start. It's the wall that keeps invaders out. Without it, a marriage is just a house of cards, waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it all down. Our house was already weak, and Charles didn't just let in a breeze. He invited in a hurricane. I do miss my husband sometimes. I miss the man he was, or at least, the man I thought he was. I miss the easy laughter we shared, the way he would hold my hand in the car. But I would rather live with the ghost of that good memory than be entangled in a never-ending, vain battle with his obsessed mistress. I chose peace. For myself, and for my son. Every single day he finds a new way to reach out. He sends me messages on Facebook from new accounts he creates. He sends long, pleading emails through WhatsApp. He begs for forgiveness. He tells me he was a fool, that he understands now. He says he never expected things to escalate to this level, that he never expected to lose everything. And every time I see his name pop up on my screen, I'm brought back to what my mother, Christina, told me all those years ago. The simple truth that he never learned. If you cannot stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. If you cannot bear the devastating consequences that come with cheating and unfaithfulness, then it is so much better to stay away from it completely. He chose to play with fire, and now all he has left is the ashes. Is it better to live in a broken home, or to come from one? It's a question I think about a lot now. I look at my son Scott, sleeping peacefully in his bed, in our quiet little apartment, and I know I made the right choice. Our home is not broken. It's smaller, yes. It's different from the one I once dreamed of. But it is whole. It is filled with love and safety, and there are no monsters hiding under the bed or standing in the doorway. There is just us. And our peace is priceless. Sometimes, when I'm having a weak moment, I let myself wonder what would have happened if I had done things differently. What if I had fought for him, the way my friends wanted me to? What if I had confronted Anita, screamed at her, dragged our family's problems out into the street for everyone to see? Would the outcome have been any different? I don't think so. It would have just been louder. It would have been more painful. I would have spent months, maybe even years, fighting a war I couldn't win, because the person I was fighting for had already surrendered to the other side. The truth is, Charles was a weak man. He was a man who ran from responsibility. He ran from honest conversation. He ran from the difficult day-to-day work of being a husband and a father. And when you spend your whole life running, you eventually run out of places to go. Now he's alone, trapped in the mess he created. Anita, from what I've heard, wants nothing to do with him or the baby now that the drama and the potential for a payday are gone. She got what she wanted, destruction. And he's left with nothing but the consequences of his actions. He still tries to see Scott, but it's through supervised visits, with a court-appointed monitor present. He has to earn back the right to be a father, one awkward, supervised hour at a time. I see the pain in his eyes when the hour is up, and he has to say goodbye. I see the regret. But I can't let his pain become my problem anymore. My only job is to protect my son from the fallout of his father's choices. My only loyalty is to the peaceful life I have built for us. He lost everything. And for what? For a cheap thrill? For a moment of validation from a woman who saw him as nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game? He traded a mansion for a shack, and now he's wondering why he's sitting in the rain. The world is full of people like Charles and Anita. People who refuse to take responsibility. People who believe their own desires are more important than the promises they make. They are the manipulators, the excuse makers, the ones who light the match and then act surprised when the world goes up in flames. They walk among us every day, leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered trust in their wake. They thrive on drama and feed on the pain of others. They are the bullies of the heart, and the only way to win their game is to refuse to play. If you've listened to my story this far, it's because a part of you understands this. You know that integrity and honesty are not just words. They are the foundation of everything that matters. So, I'm asking you to make a choice. If you believe that people should be held accountable for their actions, prove you are not on their side. Show the world that you stand against the liars and the cheats. Comment, "Loyalty is everything" below to show where you stand. Every subscription to this channel is a vote for honesty over deception. It's a statement that stories of strength and survival are more powerful than stories of betrayal. Hit subscribe if you believe that. Only the trolls and the manipulators would ignore it. And finally, hit the like button to spread this message. Let's make sure that anyone who has ever felt the pain of betrayal knows they are not alone. And let's remind people like Charles and Anita that in the end, they don't get the final say. We do. Thank you for listening. And always remember, at Virtuous Stories, we love you.